Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're in session number 3 of our new series entitled The Slippery Slope of Substantial Medical Evidence. And I have a fascinating program for you today, one that is going to illustrate, through review of case law examples, it's going to illustrate many of the principles that we've discussed so far in sessions number 1 and sessions number 2. And before we get into the topic of today's discussion, let's just briefly review where we've come from so far in this program, and let's review the basic philosophy, the overriding philosophy of this program. The overriding philosophy of this program is all about, number 1, improving the content and quality of each of our qualified medical evaluation reports individually. And then number 2, if we can succeed at number 1, in other words, if each of us can succeed at cranking up the content and quality of our reports, then we'll achieve goal number 2, which is to improve the overall efficiency of the workers' compensation system here in the state of California. And as you may or may not know, the workers' compensation system here in California is rife with delays, expensive delays, many of which can be traced to low quality and unusable qualified medical evaluators reports, such as the reports that you and I submit on a daily basis. So in getting better and better and better at creating opinions and conclusions that qualify as substantial medical evidence, the system can begin to move quicker, more efficiently, and less expensively in the delivering of badly needed benefits to California's injured workers. So this program has every potential to improve the system as a whole, and that begins by improving the content and quality of the work products that we put our signatures on and put into the mailbox deliverable to the parties. So in session number 1, we defined what it means to qualify your opinions as substantial medical evidence, and we established the philosophy that if you can raise the quality of your opinions and conclusions to the high ideal, the high standard of substantial medical evidence, you can relax. You can rely on those opinions and conclusions as likely being the true and accurate opinions and conclusions that fit the particular circumstances and scenarios that your examinees find themselves in. And when I say that you can rely on your opinions and conclusions when those opinions and conclusions qualify as substantial, what I mean is that you can be confident and comfortable in the fact that you've provided an opinion and conclusion that, based on the information that's available at the time, is 99.99% of the time going to be the true, accurate, and perfectly natural opinion and conclusion for the particular circumstance. In other words, you can relax, and if you're ever interrogated or cross-examined at deposition about your opinion and conclusion, you can rely on that opinion and conclusion until such point in time as new evidence becomes available that would cause you to change your opinion or conclusion based upon new evidence, new information. So when you provide opinions and conclusions based on the information that's available at the time, and you qualify those opinions and conclusions as substantial medical evidence, you can rely on those opinions and you can relax knowing that you've provided the most accurate opinion that's possible based on the available information, and you can relax knowing that any other reasonable person, including any other qualified medical evaluator, would arrive at the same opinion and conclusion that you arrived at if they were provided with the same information, the same facts, the same physical examination findings, the same diagnostic study findings. In the context of the same information, any other evaluator would arrive at the same opinion and conclusion that you did, so you can relax. In session number 2, I showed you how to integrate substantial medical evidence opinions into your causation determination, your AOE, COE determination, in those cases where compensability is the disputed issue, and this represents a large percentage of the cases that we're getting nowadays where the disputed issue has to do with compensability under Labor Code 4060. And I showed you how to fashion your opinions and conclusions and arrive at the true and accurate conclusion regarding AOE and COE every single time. Every single time. You can relax knowing that in the high stakes decision-making process on compensability under Labor Code 4060, you never ever want to get that determination wrong. You want to be right 100% of the time, and I showed you a system as to exactly how to do that, and that system begins by qualifying your opinion either for industrial injury or against industrial injury, by qualifying that opinion as substantial medical evidence. And if you do that, you can never go wrong. And then finally, the fifth aspect of this program has to do with continually improving the substantiability of the opinions that you provide. In other words, once you get comfortable with the writing process of writing your opinions and conclusions as substantial opinions and conclusions, the next phase in your development will be adopting substantial medical evidence as a way of thinking. First, it's going to begin as a method of writing for you, where you'll have to go through conscious medical decision making as you substantiate each and every opinion that you offer. Well, as you become comfortable and fluent in doing that, you will notice that you adopt the ideas of substantial medical evidence into a way of thinking, not only in your professional life as a qualified medical evaluator, but even in your outside activities and in your everyday conversations with people that are close to you. You're going to start substantiating all of your opinions and conclusions, and you're going to demand that other people do that as well. And in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that, because it simply improves the level of communication and heightens and elevates the level of communication between parties when you qualify everything that you say as a substantial opinion. Okay? And so part of improving our opinions and conclusions throughout the years as we develop as qualified medical evaluators has to do with reviewing case law examples wherein qualified medical evaluators have, on the one hand, have succeeded in qualifying their opinions and conclusions as substantial medical evidence, and then on the other hand, reviewing examples where qualified medical evaluators have fallen a little short or failed in qualifying their opinions as substantial, and then therefore those opinions and conclusions were not able to be used by the parties in the resolution of disputed issues. So there's tremendous learning experience in reviewing case law, and today I have two such cases to share with you, which are illustrative of the principles that we've discussed so far in sessions number 1 and number 2. So with no further ado, let's begin today's discussion, which is session number 3 of our new program entitled The Slippery Slope of Substantial Medical Evidence. Okay, so let's begin today's discussion, wherein I have two cases to review with you, which will illustrate some of the principles that we've discussed so far. And in order to set the stage for today's discussion, let's just briefly review a couple of the concepts from sessions number 1 and sessions number 2. Now, in session number 1, we spent a great amount of time going through some case law definitions of what it means to have opinions that are substantial opinions. In other words, we described and defined what qualifies as substantial medical evidence. And just to reiterate some of those criteria, let's just see how many of those criteria we can remember from, say, the Escobedo case. You remember, the Escobedo case said that in order for opinions and conclusions to qualify as substantial medical evidence, they must be predicated, number one, they must be predicated on reasonable medical probability, Number 2, they must be based on relevant facts. Number 3, cannot include any component of guess, conjecture, surmise, or speculation. They must explain the how and why reasoning behind the opinion and conclusion. And finally, the opinion and conclusion must be based, or let's say an opinion is not substantial. That's the way it was described in Escobedo. They said what is not substantial is an opinion or conclusion that's based on facts no longer germane, or if it's based on incorrect legal theories. Now, I want to emphasize incorrect legal theories because one of the cases that we're going to review today, the qualified medical evaluator's opinion was disqualified because it was found that he was basing opinions on incorrect legal theory, an incorrect legal theory. And then in session number 2, I showed you how to be correct on AOE COE 100% of the time, and this was illustrative as to how qualifying your opinions and conclusions as substantial medical evidence is a medical decision-making system that you can rely on to bring you to the accurate opinion and conclusion in every single case. And what I suggested to you in that session is that this is how you make your decisions in the qualified medical evaluation. You don't make your decision first and then try to discover or uncover the support for your opinion or conclusion. You first develop the support. You look for the support, and then you look at the two sides of the coin, and you look at both sides of the coin, either an applicant-oriented decision or a defense-oriented decision, the both sides of the coin, correct? You look at both sides of the decision, and you look to the decision that has the most support, and that's how you decide. You go with the decision that has the most support, the decision that is the more substantial of the two opinions. This is how you make your medical decisions in the qualified medical evaluation. You don't decide on the outcome first and then look for support for the decision. You first establish the support and then use the support to select your decision. Okay? Now, in today's session, I want to share with you 2 cases where the qualified medical evaluator's opinions were found to be not substantial. And I should say medical evaluators versus qualified medical evaluators, because in one of the cases, one of the medical evaluators was the primary treating physician. And then later, when the primary treating physician's opinion was found to be not substantial, they brought in a qualified medical evaluator as well. So both primary treating physicians and qualified medical evaluators need to be familiar with the concepts of substantial medical evidence, because both parties have the authority to resolve disputed issues, and cases can be resolved on both the opinions of the primary treating physician and, of course, on the opinions of the qualified medical evaluator. Okay? So the first case I want to share with you today has to do with the Robinson versus City of Riverside case. And the problem that was encountered in that case was that the QME's opinion on AOE COE, right? We talked about AOE COE in our last session. The QME's opinion on AOE COE was found to be not substantial because he based his opinion and conclusion on an incorrect legal theory. And because he based his opinion on an incorrect legal theory, the judge felt that the qualified medical evaluator did not understand certain concepts regarding workers' injuries, and the QME was then replaced. And this is going to be a fascinating case for us that's particularly applicable to the current climate because it has to deal with cumulative trauma injuries. So I'm excited to share with you the teaching principles of that case. And then the second case I want to review with you is the Battle versus State of California Department of Corrections. And this is a fascinating case as well that involved both a primary treating physician and also a qualified medical evaluator. So in the case of the primary treating physician, he evaluated the examinee, And he provided a permanent impairment rating for the lower extremity, but he did not cite his how and why reasoning, and he did not cite his source as to where he came up with the lower extremity permanent impairment rating. So his lower extremity permanent impairment rating was found to be not substantial. So this is an illustrative principle for us about how it's necessary for us to go into great detail when we provide our permanent impairment opinions by citing the source of our permanent impairment rating, citing the particular chapter in the AMA guide, citing the particular table, citing the particular figure, citing the particular formula for calculating impairment ratings, etc. It's important that you substantiate your permanent impairment rating. Well, because the primary treating physician didn't do such a great job, they called in a qualified medical evaluator, and qualified medical evaluator really messed it up, and it was found that he screwed up the whole case because his opinions on not only permanent impairment but also his opinion on causation and his opinion on apportionment, none of the three opinions were found to be substantial medical evidence. And the qualified medical evaluator in this case also, like the Robinson case, the qualified medical evaluator was replaced and lost his influence over the case. Now, you and I as qualified medical evaluators, we hope that in every case that we opine upon, we hope that our opinions will be upheld by the parties, but many times we have no way to know or no way to ascertain the outcome of these cases. And I'm certain that both of these qualified medical evaluators would be disappointed to learn that their opinions and their reports were discarded by the parties. Well, in the future, can you imagine if the opinions and conclusions that we offer, can you imagine if those opinions and conclusions cannot be made? Can you imagine a scenario wherein the claims payers would fail to reimburse us or would refuse to reimburse us for those reports if those reports cannot be used to resolve the disputed issues that were requested of us in the first place? Can you imagine such a scenario? Well, I can tell you that such a scenario is not too far off in the future. So it's imperative that we improve the content and quality of our opinions and conclusions so that they can be used the first time to resolve disputed issues. Okay, so let's talk about this causation determination in the Robinson versus City of Riverside case. Okay, so with the Robinson versus City of Riverside case, the qualified medical evaluator was discharged from the case because his opinion was found on AOE-COE, on compensability, to be not substantial. And this case is going to be very illustrative for you related to cumulative trauma injuries. And if you're anything like me, you're getting these cumulative trauma injury cases all the time. And this case gives us a great insight as to how these cases are resolved by the workers' compensation judges. So with the Robinson case, Robinson was the applicant, of course, and the applicant, he sought reconsideration of the findings and award, which was issued by the workers' compensation judge, wherein the judge found that the applicant sustained injury to his lumbar spine, but that the applicant did not sustain injury to his neck, upper extremities, and lower extremities. See, the applicant, Robinson, he alleged industrial injury to multiple body parts, including the lumbar spine, the neck, the upper, and the lower extremities, plural. But the qualified medical evaluator opined that only the lumbar spine qualified as an industrial injury, and that opinion was upheld by the judge. But then the applicant sought a reconsideration of that finding. And the applicant contended that the medical report of the qualified medical evaluator was not substantial medical evidence because it appeared that the doctor did not understand the concept of cumulative trauma injuries. And this is going to be important for you and I, because you and I opine on these cases all the time. And so let's see just what the doctor's opinion was. Let's see if you can relate to the qualified medical evaluator's opinion. And then let's just see how that opinion was handled by the judges and how the opinion was handled then upon reconsideration. So Mr. Robinson was a police officer for the city of Riverside, California. And Mr. Robinson claimed injury to his neck, his upper extremities, his lumbar spine, and the lower extremities. So this is multiple body parts, especially considering that the upper extremities are plural and the lower extremities are plural. And he claimed a cumulative trauma period from June 15, 2009 through September 7, 2016. So an approximate 7-year period. Well, in 2017, the applicant was examined by qualified medical evaluator Dr. Fennison, and Dr. Fennison did several of the activities that qualify as substantial medical evidence. He examined Mr. Robinson, he took a history, and he reviewed the medical record. And in his report, he started to establish the basis for his opinions and conclusions, and he stated that when he was interviewing Mr. Robinson, he noted that Mr. Robinson could not recall any specific episodes that took place during the cumulative trauma period, but that Mr. Robinson did document that over the past 20 plus years as a peace officer, he was involved in multiple motor vehicle accidents and multiple altercations with assailants, but none of those resulted in what either Mr. Robinson or Dr. Fennison qualified as a specific incident of injury. Further, Mr. Robinson documents having to chase after individuals, climbing over walls, performing jumping activities, and states for the most part that he continued to work. In other words, he suffered no disability. He continued to work and fight through some of his symptoms so that he could continue to perform his daily work activity. And the conclusions of Dr. Fennison were that this examinee has multiple complaints involving his neck and back as well as his upper extremities and his knee joints. However, at this point in time, there does not appear to be any clear link between his musculoskeletal difficulties involving, number one, the cervical spine, and this is where the doctor starts to discount some of the body parts alleged by Mr. Robinson. The cervical spine, there's no link between his bilateral upper extremities, and there's no link between his knee joints and his work activities for the city of Riverside. He has not presented to me any information documenting to me any specific injuries that have taken place during the time frame that has been listed that would correlate with this being an industrial injury. And notice here that the doctor references specific injuries, whereas this is expressly a claim for cumulative trauma injury over a 7-year period of time. It does not appear that as if he has filed any previous claims except for in 2008 for his bilateral upper extremities, nor has he missed any time from work due to some of the other conditions that he discussed. So the doctor here tells us that there's been no disability and there's apparently been no need for medical treatment as well. Therefore, the doctor concludes it is more likely than not that these incidents would have been considered under first aid versus actual work-related injuries. Here comes his conclusion. Here comes the conclusion. Therefore, at this point in time, I do find AOE-COE for his lumbar spine, and he should continue to treat with Dr. Hopkins to address his current difficulties, but fortunately he does not have any active signs of radiculopathy, and he goes on to talk here about the lumbar spine. So here he opines for industrial injury for the lumbar spine on a cumulative trauma basis, but he denies industrial injury on a cumulative trauma basis for the cervical spine, for the upper extremities, and for the lower extremities. And he provides some reasoning that seems to us to make sense. In fact, you might find yourself in such a similar scenario as Dr. Fennison. You might find yourself opining similarly as does Dr. Fennison. Now, in deposition, Mr. Robinson, in supporting his claim for industrial injury, he described his job duties, and he explained that his job duties included patrol in a vehicle, responding to calls that could involve robberies, domestic violence or fights, etc. He stated that he wore a bullet-resistant vest and a duty belt with radio, gun, ammo, baton, etc. The vest weighed approximately 4 pounds. He wore the vest every day. It is attached by straps over the shoulders and around the torso. And here he sets the tone to support that these types of activities over time could result in cumulative trauma to his body. He later elaborated and stated that he was involved in 5 motor vehicle accidents as a patrol officer. He's been going to a chiropractor for the last 20 years for neck and back pain. Neck and back pain have increased over the years. He has pain and numbness in his knees. And before he was a patrol officer, he did not have pain in any of the body parts for which he's claiming industrial cumulative trauma injury. So Mr. Robinson is alleging a cumulative trauma injury over a period of 7 years. And in providing his opinion and conclusion against industrial injury, Dr. Fennison, the qualified medical evaluator, references an absence of any specific incidences of injury that could support Mr. Robinson's claim. So what's the difference between a specific incident of injury and a cumulative trauma injury to the body? Well, according to Labor Code 3208.1, an injury may be either specific or cumulative. A specific injury occurs as a result of one incident or one exposure, which then causes disability or need for medical treatment. On the other hand, a cumulative trauma injury occurs as either repetitive mentally or physically traumatic activities which extend over a period of time, such as a 7-year period of time, the combined effect of which causes any disability or need for medical treatment. So Dr. Fennison, in opining against industrial injury, he cited that Mr. Robinson had not suffered any disability or in the past had not demonstrated any need for medical treatment for any specific incident of injury occurring during the 7-year period of time. And the judge found that Dr. Fennison was correct initially on his opinion against AOE-COE, but then Mr. Robinson sought reconsideration of that opinion or conclusion by referencing that Dr. Fennison predicated his opinion on an incorrect legal theory. So on reconsideration, the court overturned the workers' compensation judge's findings and award, and they explained that here Dr. Fennison's explanation for his opinion that applicant did not sustain a cumulative trauma injury appears to indicate that the doctor does not accurately understand the legal definition of a cumulative trauma injury. His opinion appears to be based on an incorrect legal theory and does not constitute substantial evidence. Therefore, his opinion, the opinion of Dr. Fennison, is not an appropriate basis for the workers' compensation judge's findings. And in this case, Dr. Fennison was replaced because it was considered, or it was the thought, that he didn't understand cumulative trauma injuries, and that there would be no reason or no probability of a better opinion coming from this particular qualified medical evaluator, because apparently he did not understand the nature of cumulative trauma type injuries. So in this case, Dr. Fennison's opinion appeared to fall short of substantial medical evidence when he referred to specific incidences of injury and a lack of specific incidents of injury that cause either disability or the need for medical treatment. And with cumulative trauma injuries, no specific incidences of injury are required in order for the examinee to qualify as having suffered a cumulative trauma injury. So in this particular case, it was felt that the doctor based his opinion and conclusion on an incorrect legal theory, and according to Escobedo, an opinion is not considered substantial medical evidence if it's based on facts no longer germane or based on inaccurate legal theories. So thus, for us as qualified medical evaluators, it's important that we stay up and current on case law and up and current on the correct legal theories that are prevalent in the everyday cases that we evaluate. Okay, so that was an opinion on AOE-COE that was found to be not substantial. Let's now talk about the Battle versus the California Department of Corrections case, wherein both the primary treating physician and the qualified medical evaluator fell short in their opinions and conclusions. Okay, so let's review some of the details of the Battle case, and we're going to go into this case in a little bit more detail because it contains several illustrative principles. So Battle was a corrections officer for the California Department of Corrections, and on 12/11/2013, Battle suffered a specific injury to the right knee. This was in 2013. Well, this was a minor injury to the knee. Battle suffered only 3 days of total temporary disability, after which he returned to work full duty without restrictions and was found to have 0% whole person impairment for the right knee. The case was closed and nothing further was heard from Mr. Battle in the next several years. And then on January 28, 2016, Mr. Battle suffered a specific incident of injury, this time that involved the low back, that involved the left shoulder, and that involved the right knee. And this particular injury resulted in a need for right knee surgery, among other things, not considering the treatment that was required for the lower back and the left shoulder. Well, the surgeon, who was the primary treating physician, declared Mr. Battle to be permanent and stationary and provided for 12% lower extremity impairment that converted to 5% whole person impairment. But he did not cite the section of the AMA guides that he used to arrive at his rating, and we're going to look at some of his physical examination findings here in just a minute. So he did not cite the section of the guides used to arrive at the rating, so his opinion on permanent impairment was found to be not substantial medical evidence. Well, they called in a qualified medical evaluator. The qualified medical evaluator provided a new and different opinion on permanent impairment, and that wasn't the main issue of concern, but rather on apportionment. The QME contradicted the entire medical record by describing the 12/11/2013 injury to be the primary injury, whereas 128/16, at least as relates to the right knee, was simply an exacerbation of the earlier 2013 industrial injury. And this contradicted the entire medical record up to that point in time. From the date of the injury on January 28, 2016, that injury was considered to be a new specific incident of injury. It was a new specific incident of injury that involved the left shoulder, the lumbar spine, and the right knee. and the qualified medical evaluator described the right knee involvement as simply being an exacerbation of the prior condition from 2013, whereas all medical evidence and even the testimony of Mr. Battle was that that right knee condition from 2013 had completely resolved. It completely resolved to pre-injury condition. So the qualified medical evaluator was relieved, and it was found in this case that both the causation opinion of the QME, the permanent impairment opinion of the primary treating physician, and the apportionment opinion of the qualified medical evaluator, all of these opinions were not considered to be substantial medical evidence, and the case was returned to the workers' compensation judge, who assigned new evaluators to the case. So let's review some of the medical findings in this case and see how it was that these evaluators arrived at their incorrect determinations. So let's take a look at the permanent and stationary report of the primary treating physician, which was the surgeon that did the right knee surgery. So the doctor tells us that on November 16, 2016, Ms. Battle underwent arthroscopic partial lateral meniscectomy and debridement. And if you're familiar with Chapter 17 of the AMA guides, the diagnosis-based conditions have an impairment rating for partial meniscectomy. They have impairment ratings for partial and complete meniscectomy, either medial meniscectomy or lateral meniscectomy. So Ms. Battle qualifies for permanent impairment simply on the basis that she had at least a partial lateral meniscectomy. At the time of surgery, she was found to have degenerative changes of the patellofemoral compartment and also the medial compartment. She completed physical therapy. She continued with self-directed exercises. She's been able to return back to her usual and customary activities. And she continues to take naproxen medication on an intermittent basis. Current subjective complaints are that she's improved since surgery without any mechanical symptoms. However, she still continues to have intermittent pain behind the kneecap in the lateral joint line of the right knee, wherein she had the lateral meniscectomy. She has no mechanical symptoms of locking or catching. On physical exam, she was found to have normal gait on the right lower extremity, normal gait on the left lower extremity. She was found to have no deformity or spasm. Alignment of the knee was normal. There was no swelling, no ecchymosis. But the primary treating physician described a physical examination finding of 1 centimeter of right thigh quadriceps atrophy. Right thigh quadriceps atrophy. Now, right thigh quadriceps atrophy of 1 centimeter does not qualify for a permanent impairment rating. It's under the atrophy threshold for a permanent impairment rating, but this is one physical examination finding cited by the primary treating physician. Primary treating physician described some loss of range of motion of the right knee with an extension lag of 5 degrees, and also 5 degrees of loss of range of motion for right knee flexion. Finally, the qualified medical evaluator described some loss of strength of the right quadriceps compared to the left quadriceps. The qualified medical evaluator does not give this a percentage strength loss. In other words, he doesn't tell us if it's 10% strength loss in his opinion, 15%, 25%. He doesn't give us a percentage, but he grades it as a 4 plus over 5. So apparently Miss Battle has pretty good strength. 4 plus is considered to be pretty good strength, just shy of absolute full strength, okay? But apparently not symmetrically strong as the uninvolved left knee. He doesn't comment here on the left knee, He only comments here on the right. Oh, over here he does tell us that the left knee had full strength in both resisted extension and resisted flexion. Okay, so some slight loss of strength in the right knee. Well, he describes the clinical impression as a partial previous arthroscopic meniscectomy and debridement, now with residual symptomatic chondromalacia. And let's see how the qualified medical evaluator provides for a permanent impairment rating, knowing that already the examinee qualifies for permanent impairment rating simply on the basis that she underwent a partial meniscectomy. And then also she may qualify for permanent impairment rating due to symptomatic chondromalacia, which could qualify for as many as 2% whole person impairment simply on the basis of symptomatic chondromalacia. Well, let's see how the primary treating physician provided for an impairment rating. Now, in providing for permanent impairment ratings for lower extremity conditions, Table 17-1 tells us that there are many methods that we need to assess the examinee for, or many different impairments that we need to assess the examinee for. And I believe there's as many as 18 different categories that the examinee could qualify for an impairment rating. So here's categories 1 through 12, and then we have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, as many as 18 different impairments that we need to assess the examinee, all of our lower extremity injury cases, for. Well, based on what we know on the physical exam provided for by the primary treating physician, we know already that Miss Battle could qualify for permanent impairment due to muscle atrophy, due to 1 centimeter of atrophy of the right thigh compared to the left. She could qualify for a permanent impairment rating due to loss of range of motion, because the range of motion findings of the doctor were for 5 degrees of loss of extension and 5 degrees of loss of flexion. He described some loss of strength on manual muscle testing. We know that she could qualify for an permanent impairment rating due to partial lateral meniscectomy. But the primary treating physician doesn't describe any of these other assessments related to limb length discrepancy. Does she have or does she not have a limb length discrepancy? Does she have any ankylosis of the knee? I assume not, because she had some range of motion of the knee. Does she suffer from post-traumatic arthritis or post-surgical arthritis in the knee? He doesn't tell us because he did not order necessary knee x-rays and did not measure the cartilage intervals of the 3 knee joint articulations that do qualify for permanent impairment when those cartilage intervals are diminished compared to the AMA guide's normals. He apparently didn't assess for nerve injury, didn't do a vascular assessment, and so there are as many as 18 different assessments that you need to do on each and every lower extremity injury case, and it's not clear what the primary treating physician is going to use in order to construct his permanent impairment rating for this particular examinee. So let's trace the primary treating physician's thinking a little bit further. So let's review some of these impairments that Ms. Battle may qualify based on the information that we have available. So Table 1733 gives us some of the diagnosis-based conditions of the lower extremity. And here, a partial lateral meniscectomy qualifies for 1% whole person impairment. And that sounds familiar. That sounds like the 1% whole person impairment that was provided for by the qualified medical evaluator. But the primary treating physician provided for 5% whole person impairment. So obviously the primary treating physician did not resort to meniscectomy as his basis for providing the 5% whole person impairment. Here, Table 17.6 tells us that with regards to thigh atrophy, a 1 centimeter thigh atrophy just barely surpasses the no impairment threshold of 0.9 centimeters atrophy. Okay, I misspoke earlier. I said that 1 centimeter of atrophy did not qualify for permanent impairment, so I was 1/10 of a centimeter off on that. So apparently 1 centimeter of atrophy would qualify for 1% whole person impairment. We're not sure if this is the basis that the primary treating physician used in determining 5% whole person impairment. And then with regards to loss or range of motion of the knee, Table 1710 tells us that Ms. Battle with 130 degrees of knee flexion does not qualify for permanent impairment due to abnormal motion of the knee in flexion. In other words, the first permanent impairment for loss of flexion occurs when the examinee has less than 110 degrees of knee flexion, whereas Ms. Battle had 130 degrees. And Ms. Battle had 5 degrees loss of extension, meaning a flexion contracture of 5 degrees, and a 5 degrees loss of range of motion for knee extension could qualify for as much as 4% whole person impairment. So we're starting to see some possibilities as to how the primary treating physician provided for 5% whole person impairment. He could have taken 4% for loss of knee range of motion, added to 1% of atrophy of the thigh, or perhaps added to 1% whole person impairment due to partial meniscectomy. But we're not clear yet as to the primary treating physician's formulation of the permanent impairment rating. So let's review the primary treating physician's permanent impairment argument. Here, the primary treating physician, he declares Ms. Battle to be permanent and stationary, and he states that per the 5th edition AMA guides, the patient's residual quadriceps weakness would yield 12% lower extremity impairment, which is equivalent to 5% whole body impairment. And this is the extent of the primary treating physician's permanent impairment argument. He does not go on to tell us how he arrived at the 5% whole person impairment. And remember back when we reviewed the primary treating physician's strength loss findings, he did not provide a percentage of strength loss, which could then be used in the formulation of a permanent impairment rating due to weakness, but the primary treating physician did not do that. Well, this was found to be insufficient, so let's see what the judge had to say about this rating. So in the judge's notes, the judge stated that we note that when a physician evaluates an injured employee's whole person impairment, the physician must explain how he or she arrived at the whole person impairment so that the parties and the appeals board can determine whether the whole person impairment is consistent with the AMA guides. The whole person impairment rating must be based upon the AMA guides. Okay? In this case, the primary treating physician failed to explain how he arrived at 12% lower extremity impairment for the applicant's right knee, and were unable to determine whether the doctor's impairment assessment is consistent with the AMA guides. We therefore conclude that the workers' compensation judge erred in determining permanent impairment in accordance with the primary treating physician's description. So then what happened is, even though Dr. Glausman, the primary treating physician, failed to explain in his report how he arrived at the lower extremity impairment, the workers' compensation judge attempted to provide the explanation in his own report. in his own report. Remember, this case came under reconsideration, and the judge stated in his report on reconsideration that the primary treating physician assessed the 12% lower extremity impairment based upon lower extremity weakness under Table 17.8, page 532 of Chapter 17. And the judge went on to explain that Dr. Glausman then used the conversion table, which converts 12% lower extremity impairment to 5% whole person impairment. So, at least according to the judge, in interpreting the primary treating physician's report, the judge does the calculations and does the explanation for us by somehow finding within Table 17.8 some impairment rating that equals 12% lower extremity impairment. So, 12% lower extremity impairment is somewhere found in Table 17.8, which even the judge does not describe. Well, the appeals board was not convinced by this, and they told us that the above analysis provided by the judge is not found in the doctor's report. The doctor reported that upon examination, he found 1 centimeter of right thigh quadricep atrophy. He also reported that on a scale of 1 to 5, applicant had 4+ motor strength in her right quadriceps. However, he provided no discussion of how these findings of atrophy and slightly reduced motor strength translate to 12% lower extremity impairment and therefore 5% whole person impairment. So here is Table 17-8, and according to this table, weakness in resisted knee flexion rated as a grade 4 does indeed qualify for 12% lower extremity impairment, which converts to 5% whole person impairment. So the 12 and the 5 are found in this particular table in Chapter 17. But this is the judge's explanation of the doctor's impairment rating, whereas the doctor himself does not provide this exact description out of Table 17-8. So they tell us here that in addition, we note that Table 17.8, referenced by the judge, does not appear in Dr. Glausman's report, which also does not clearly address quadriceps weakness. And the conclusion is, although the workers' compensation judge does have special expertise in rating and may rate permanent disability without a formal rating, it is outside the workers' compensation judge's expertise to insert his own analysis of whole person impairment into the permanent stationary report and then follow that analysis to determine permanent disability. So the take-home message from this finding is that we as qualified medical evaluators need to clearly state our how and why reasoning as to how we came up with our permanent impairment ratings and take the parties through step by step exactly how we arrived at the final and permanent impairment rating with references to specific tables, specific charts, specific formulas, and just as if we were teaching a 5th grade math class, take the parties through a series of steps that bring them to the bottom line of our permanent impairment rating. Otherwise, that permanent impairment rating cannot be used by the parties. So this left the parties basically stuck on this case because the qualified medical evaluator, as we stated earlier, his opinions on causation and apportionment were found to be not substantial because he contradicted the entire medical record in describing the second knee injury to be simply an exacerbation of the first knee injury. So his opinions were discarded. And then the primary treating physician's opinion on permanent impairment could not be relied upon because he didn't clearly elaborate as to how he arrived at the permanent impairment rating. And so the parties were stuck, and they concluded that, as stated by the Court of Appeal in this particular case, the workers' compensation judges or the board may not leave undeveloped matters which its acquired special knowledge should identify as requiring further evidence. They can't leave these matters undeveloped. They need to develop the record and develop the permanent impairment rating and develop the specific facts that are in dispute that are hanging up and blocking the resolution of this case. In this case, the workers' compensation judge should further develop the medical record on permanent disability in a manner consistent with McDuffie versus Los Angeles County. However, we conclude that no further resort to the qualified medical evaluator, Dr. Friedman, should be made, as his opinion is not substantial evidence for the reasons already discussed. So can you imagine this, doctors? The opinion of the primary treating physician cannot be used. The opinion of the qualified medical evaluator, who was paid handsomely for his work and for his reporting in the case, cannot be used, and now the parties need to either identify an agreed medical evaluator, an independent medical evaluator, or assign a new qualified panel qualified medical evaluator. And can you see the tremendous delay in the resolution of this case? This is a tremendous clog to the system, and this is just one case. Can you imagine this happening up and down the entire state of California and introducing tremendous delay and unnecessary additional medical legal costs for additional evaluators to handle issues that should have been handled in the first case by the medical evaluators involved in the case? So doctors, I hope these two cases provide you some illustrative principles upon which you can rely in formulating your own opinions and conclusions in the cases that are assigned to you. So if you think back to our definition of what constitutes substantial medical evidence, the criteria that qualify as substantial medical evidence basically provide us a formula, a recipe, a system for qualifying each and every opinion that we offer in each and every report that we submit and put in the mail. If you take your opinions and conclusions through these criteria, number one, you predicate them on reasonable medical probability. Number two, you explain the how and why reasoning, and you cite facts in support of your opinions and conclusion. And then you ask yourself and you review your argument, and you ask yourself, is there anything in this argument that's based on facts that are no longer germane? Is there anything in this argument that's based on an incorrect or a suspicious legal theory? Is there anything in this opinion and conclusion that relies on speculation, guess, conjecture, surmise? If you take your opinions and conclusions through each one of those filters, okay? So you pour your opinion in the top of a funnel. You pour your opinion, and the opinion passes down through these narrow, and increasingly narrow filters down through a funnel. If that opinion falls out the bottom, in other words, it survives the filter of reasonable medical probability, it survives the filter of based on correct legal theories, if it survives the filter of being based on relevant facts, if it survives the filter of being based on no speculation, no conjecture, no surmise, etc., if it falls out of the bottom and lands on your paper, it's likely an opinion or conclusion that's true. It's true. The reason it's true is because it's survived the filters. Only opinions and conclusions that are true can survive the filters. And in these particular cases, the medical evaluators failed to qualify their opinions and conclusions as substantial by failing to submit the opinion and conclusion through the filters. Neither of the opinions were predicated on reasonable medical probability. None of the opinions were based on relevant facts. None of the opinions explained the how and why reasoning as to how the doctor in the Robinson case came up with his AOE-COE determination. And in the Battle case, there was no explanation as to how the primary treating physician came up with his permanent impairment rating. So the bottom line take-home message is to explain, 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 and you cannot over-explain your reasoning. And you explain your reasoning by running it through the filters of substantial medical evidence. So doctors, I hope this helps you. In our next session, I want to talk to you about substantial medical evidence and your apportionment determination, and I want to show you how to arrive at the perfectly naturally correct apportionment approximate percentages, if you can believe such a thing, if you can believe it. How to arrive at the accurate and perfectly correct apportionment approximate percentages, whether it be 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, whatever your apportionment approximate percentages are, you can relax and rely on those opinions knowing that they're accurate when you follow the system that I want to share with you in our very next session. So doctors, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's session. I look forward to being with you on our very next session as well. And for now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.